Hello, everyone. It is with a great pleasure that I start this debate with the director of First Draft, Claire Wardle, one of the most important researchers in the field of disinformation and misinformation studies, to whom I thank so much for accepting our invitation to participate in this event. And also with the journalist and JGL researcher, Alexandre Amaral. We had some confusion regarding the start time of this conference, and I would like to apologize to our guests once again for this and thank them for their understanding. Claire Wardle is currently the US Director of First Draft, a nonprofit working on solutions to challenges associated with trust and trust in the digital age. She was previously a researcher fellow at the Shorenstein Center at Harvard's Kennedy School, the research director at the Tau Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia Journalism School, head of social media for UN Refugee Agency, and director of news service for Storyful. Wardle is one of the world's experts on user-generated content and have led to substantial research projects investigating how it is handled by news organizations. She also sits on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on the future of information and entertainment. Alexandre Amaral is journalist, filmmaker, and how he likes to say, a pilgrim. He is currently the communications manager for Milen, Media and Information Literacy Expert Network in Deutsche Welle Academy, and works with the UNESCO Global Alliance for Media and Information Literacy as a youth coordinator in Latin America and Caribbean. So, as everyone here knows, this online event, the challenges of journalism and media literacy in face of the scenario of misinformation in the world, is promoted by the research group Journalism, Law and Freedom at Institute for Advanced Study of University of São Paulo as an effort that integrates the activities of the Global Week of Media and Information Literacy 2021 established by UNESCO. That's why I started here with some of the points brought up by this year's UNESCO concept note. I quote, "This year marks 10 years since the seed of global media and information literacy week were planted in 2011 in Fez, Morocco, and captured in the Fez Declaration on Media and Information Literacy, MIL. This was long before the exponential rise in disinformation, political polarization, increasing influence of digital platforms, and the COVID-19 pandemic. According to UNESCO concept note for this global week, I quote again, the media and information literacy was featured as one of the key topics at the 2021 World Press Freedom Day Global Conference held in Namibia with the overall theme, Information as a Public Good. As an outcome of the conference, the Windhoek Plus 30 Declaration was adopted on 3 May 2021, noting that media and information literacy helps people navigate through the evolving information landscape and that freedom of expression and access to information should be promoted for the public good." End of the quote. And the direction of this global week point out at the end of the first part of the UNESCO concept notes should be media and information literacy for the public good. I quote again. It's necessary to focus on how the global community can use Global MIL Wiki to build media and information literacy as key to a vision of information as a public good. While the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated how lies can cost lives, the challenge of false and hateful expressions also go much wider, affecting our identities, our sense of human solidarity, and peace, our democratic systems, and progress on human rights and sustainable development, end of the quote. And we must also not forget that this year, the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Philippine journalist Maria Ressa and Russian journalist Dmitry Andreevich Muratov. According to the Norwegian Nobel 2021 committee, they were awarded for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. Before giving the floor to our guest speaker, Claire, and then to our colleague, Alexandre Amaral, I would like to introduce and thank our more than special guests who are here to collaborate with this debate with their questions. Januária Cristina Alves, Masters in Social Communication at ECA USP, journalist, edu-communicator, writer of more than 50 children's books, twice winner of Jabuti, the most important award of Brazilian literature, co-writer of Como Não Ser Enganado pelas Fake News, How to Avoid Being Fooled by Fake News, member of ABP-Ducom, Brazilian Association of Education Researchers and Professionals, and of UNESCO Global Alliance for Partnerships on Media and Information Literacy. Elisa Tobias, Bachelor of Educommunication at ECA USP. She is Communication Analyst at Palavra Aberta Institute. She has experience in third sector organizations, in digital marketing agencies, and in private companies in the marketing area. Emilio Moreno, he is journalist. He's currently taking his MBA in marketing and digital communication at ESPM Rio. He has a large experience in digital marketing and content distribution for digital platforms, working at media companies as O Povo, TV Jangadeiro, TV Ceará, and Intercept Brasil. He works as communities manager at Redes Cordiais, a media literacy organization. Maria Clara Cabral is journalist with more than 15 years of experience. She has worked at Folha de São Paulo, Portal Terra, and Diário do ABC. In 50/50, founded Qual é, a digital and printed bi-weekly magazine for children that is pluralistic, non-partisan, and has didactic revision and pedagogical consultants. And I am Edilamar Galvão. I am a poet, journalist, researcher at JGL and coordinator of the undergraduate course in journalism at FAP. And here I am in the role of the moderator of this debate. Claire and Alexandre will make their own presentations with a duration of around 15 minutes. And after that, our guests will ask them their first questions. I ask everyone who is watching this live on YouTube to send their question to iearesponde@usp.br. Eu peço para todos que estão nos assistindo agora, que quiserem mandar suas questões, que então mande para o endereço de e-mail iearesponde@usp.br.
Thank you very much for having me. And I'm very sorry that I'm not able to talk to you all in Portuguese. I'm a British person, and as you know, we are terrible at speaking other languages. And I'm very embarrassed to be here and you are all speaking my language. I'm also dog sitting, and there is a dog downstairs howling. So if you hear that, I'm very sorry, but it's, you know, it's the age of Zoom and the pandemic. So I put together some slides because misinformation is very visual, and I think it's sometimes useful to see some of the things that we're talking about. So some of the trends that I see as somebody who thinks about misinformation all the time, the first one is conspiracy content. It's always been there, but it was often on the fringes of the internet. And it wasn't something that I felt that we really had to think much about because it didn't travel really into the mainstream. Over the last 2 years, we have seen that shift. And rather than dismissing conspiracy theories, for me, we absolutely have to understand why this move has happened. And it's happened because people's lives have been turned upside down. This pandemic has made people terrified about their own health and safety and those of the people that they love. And when we as humans are scared, we're looking for explanations. We're looking for a sense of feeling in control. And the truth is that the pandemic or economic insecurity or climate crisis, that is ambiguous. We're waiting for more data. We need to wait and see. And that's hard to ask people to be okay with that ambiguity. Conspiracy theories are simple, powerful stories. And that is why, because people are susceptible, these explanations about the world are so powerful, because as humans, we're looking for simplistic explanations. And somebody saying, your life feels scary because somebody else is secretly controlling it, is a way that people go, oh, that explains it. Everything else feels scarier. So I just say we have to take conspiracy theories seriously because it is a signal of a deeper issue that we have to take seriously. Secondly, and I do not need to tell Brazilians this, I do need to tell Americans this, who still do not take WhatsApp seriously, but the last 18 months have shown Americans that WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger are a place where rumors circulate and we don't have fact checkers. So this has been a real new issue, but it does raise ethical questions about whether or not journalists and researchers should sit in these WhatsApp groups. What's those boundaries around surveillance in encrypted spaces? So that's for something for us to think about. But when it comes to media literacy, it is absolutely a fundamental way, particularly in countries such as Brazil, that people are getting their information. Thirdly, visual, mimetic, and video content is getting more prevalent and influential, but much more difficult to monitor and track. So artificial intelligence and machine learning are now getting much, much more sophisticated and can very cleverly make sense of text. TikTok is very, very difficult to monitor. We don't have the systems to automate this. A lot of it is ephemeral. It disappears quickly. Snapchat is still very popular in many countries. We have to understand what this new move towards visual video content means. Our brains are more susceptible to video content. It takes less critical skills. It has more of an emotional appeal. Another example is the Plantemic video from last May. Look, it looks like a Netflix program. It is slick, it is beautiful, it is professional. And one of the things that we need to teach in media and information literacy is heuristics, the mental shortcuts that help us make sense of the world, because we're so overloaded by information that simply the fact that something looks professional is a cue to our brain to say, oh, it's probably trustworthy. So again, these types of things of explaining these shifts to people are important. 4, misinformation and hate speech continue to intersect. People are taking advantage of existing racial divisions and xenophobia. And we've seen that in the last 2 weeks with the Facebook whistleblower. It is quite clear that Facebook has led to increased polarization and extremist positions. And historians, I think, will look back and say, how on earth did these platforms create such harm in such a short space of time? And we're living through this incredible historic moment when we're trying to say, what's the solution? There's no solution to the situation we find ourselves in. We're now where we are, and the secret is trying to build resilience, which is why media and information literacy is so important, because fundamentally, just tweaking the Facebook algorithm is not going to solve this. This is a human problem. And somebody I know who is a BBC reporter in India said to me 3 years ago, when I look at the role of WhatsApp in India and the growth of mob violence in India, it reminds me of the role of radio in Rwanda. Yes, we have to take these platforms seriously, but they're sitting on top of human behavior and human nature. And unfortunately, the reason that it intersects with hate speech is that as humans, we still tend to have the in-group, out-group tendencies that are leading to this kind of extremist content. And 5, I want to talk about a concept we call data deficits, which is when we think about the pandemic or vaccines, it is a new moment and we actually don't have all of the answers. And in that moment, people have very legitimate questions, such as, what is mRNA? You're telling me to take the Pfizer vaccine, but what is mRNA? Or can you tell me, will this vaccine cause infertility? Now, if we think about the information supply chain, we are spending way too much time playing whack-a-mole with the misinformation. We wait for the rumors to emerge and then we debunk them. But what we're, I think, doing a really bad job of, if we are government authority, if I'm the WHO or I'm the CDC, is answering people's very valid questions. And if we don't answer those questions, you know who does? The conspiracy theorists. They are very good at monitoring the information supply chain and figuring out where people are confused and where they have questions. And they will respond into those vacuums, and those vacuums get filled with misinformation. But if we did a better job of filling those data deficits early, I think we would have less misinformation. So that's something I feel quite strongly about, which is it's not like government authorities and journalists are doing a perfect job. There's much, much more we could do to improve the information ecosystem. Another really important point I want to stress is that the misinformation ecosystem is participatory. So this was a piece that we wrote last December, but if you think about the kind of information ecosystem that many of us inhabit, it's still a broadcast ecosystem. It might be on social media, but it's about the trusted expert giving us information. It is still linear and hierarchical and top down. And there's a sense of, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let me go and read more. The other misinformation ecosystem is participatory, it is dynamic, and people feel part of something. So just after the 2020 election in the US, people were told, send us your tips. What did you see when you voted? Be part of something. Here's the hashtag, stop the steal. Do your own research, share that research. We're listening to you. People in that ecosystem feel like they're part of something and they feel like they have agency, and it's dynamic. So they hear the same things from the person that they play golf with, the president, the person that they're hearing on the radio, the person down the pub, the person they're having dinner with. It's ricocheting around and they're part of this participatory ecosystem. Ours is, oh, have you heard what Dr. Fauci said today? And we don't give people that sense of agency to be part of something. So I would argue, and this for me is where media and information literacy is so important. How do we create an atmosphere where people feel like they're part of something? They're part of the solution, not, oh, have you done this course? This course will teach you how to be a more sophisticated consumer of information. And I'm not talking badly about, all of us are part of this. All of us tend to do this. Oh, we're going to train people so they know the right information. How do we give people that agency so they feel like they're part of the solution that's going to take us 30 years? There's not a quick solution here, but what does it mean to have information ambassadors? What does it mean to identify trusted messengers in communities? Maybe it's the person who runs the hair salon. Maybe it's the person who coaches the local football team. Maybe it's the person who runs the neighborhood Facebook group. What does it mean to understand who the new trusted messengers are? Because they're not the traditional gatekeepers that we've always said in terms of journalists, librarians. Yes, 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 still really important. But there are other people in communities that are also really trusted. And I think for me, the 6th of January was this moment that I thought, even the term misinformation doesn't really capture the fact that the people who, crossed the barricades and went into the Capitol, they believed that they had right on their side. They believed that they had truth on their side, and they were the ones that were saving democracy. This is a parallel universe of information. It's not that they've just seen a few Facebook posts. Their whole environment is telling them that this is true, and it was completely false. And still, it's 30% of Americans believe that the election was stolen. So let's try and be a little bit more positive. So what are some effective responses to misinformation? So the first one is, we have to understand how we talk about this is part of the solution. So study suggests tweets mocking 5G conspiracy theory about COVID-19 may have inadvertently popularized it. So the media can play a role, commentators can play a role in actually giving oxygen to rumors. And making fun of people who believe in conspiracy theories is really, really problematic, because there is a reason that people believe these conspiracy theories. And if we don't understand why, and we just believe that doesn't make sense, then we're doing a disservice. Nope, it's now trying to do it in a different language. Sorry, something has. Okay. Secondly, how do we write headlines? Is 5G going to kill us all? It's not a great headline. And in a world where often people don't click on the link, they just see the image and the headline, putting the rumor in the headline is not a good way of doing it. But remember, news organizations have the same incentives as platforms. Many of them, you talk to journalists who say, I get this, Claire, but you need to talk to my editor, because we need traffic, we need money. If I don't get 10x the traffic this week, I'm going to lose my job. So I understand that, but we have a real problem with the way that we're actually using debunking to drive traffic. Here's an example from a very good website, but you can see that the myths, the rumors, that they're in bold, they're in a larger font. And actually the explanation is in a smaller font. So how do we actually help people understand that our brains are, familiarity and repetition is what makes our brains tick. So seeing something and skimming down means I'm actually more likely to remember the rumor. So not only should we be training journalists in these kind of skills, we should be training the public about how our brains work and how all of us have to think about the ways that we have a tendency to remember the rumor. And here's an example from a local news site in the US, and it says, tell us, do you think people should eventually show documentation that they've had the COVID vaccine before going into crowded places like movie theaters, concerts, restaurants, bars, or shopping malls? Now, in 1996, this kind of call-in radio show wouldn't really have been a problem, because you had somebody manning the phones to make sure that whoever came through on the phones was going to say something sensible. These kind of call outs now get filled with people who are trying to push conspiracy theories. So even for journalists, there's this challenge of their content is being weaponized by bad actors. So the whole landscape has changed. And so teaching journalists and teaching the public about the ways that the mainstream media is being used by those who want to push bad information is, I would argue, part of what we should be including in media and information literacy classes, because that's partly that intersection between the professional media and bad actors many people don't understand. And this, for me, is the bit that's the most exciting, because we have the best research around it, which is inoculating people against misinformation. So there's some really good researchers like John Cook or Sander van der Linden at Cambridge University, and they have done research about, if you teach people the tactics and techniques of disinformation agents, those who are deliberately trying to push bad information, people are much better at spotting it in the wild. Because if you try and debunk information, as we know with confirmation bias, people tend to be resistant being told that they're wrong. But nobody is resistant to the idea that they've been manipulated. So in this piece, I think this is one of the standout paragraphs. John Cook writes, I found that explaining the misinformation technique completely neutralized the misinformation's influence without even mentioning the misinformation specifically. And he ends, whether you're conservative or liberal, no one wants to be deceived by misleading techniques. So this to me is what I think we should be doing so much more of in terms of building resilience, by explaining to people what are the motivations for people. I mean, I often in taxis, they go, what do you do? And I say, I study misinformation. They go, why would people do this anyway? And I say, well, some people do it to make money. Some people do it for power and influence. Some people just do it to see whether they can cause trouble, like the social and psychological reasons. So giving people more of a framework to understand this means that they're more likely to spot it in the wild. So here's a great headline from Alaska. Major funder of anti-vaccine movement makes millions selling natural health products. How much are we explaining that the anti-vaccine movement is drowning in money because they are doing it deliberately to make money for themselves, their websites? We need to do a better job of that. And this was a great piece in the Washington Post this week. 5 tactics used to spread vaccine misinformation in the wellness community and why they work. So it explains the 5 tactics, and then it explains why our brains can be pretty susceptible to these tactics. It's just a really great way of getting people to be much more aware of the ways in which their brains can sometimes play against them. And lastly, you know this, but we need to actively listen to people's concerns. So this was also a good piece in the New York Times recently by Zeynep Sufeci. The unvaccinated might not be who you think. And she talked about the fact that 25% of people have a fear of needles, but they might use misinformation rumors as a justification for why they don't want to get vaccinated, but actually it's about needles. So if we don't listen to people, it's too easy to assume that it's misinformation, but actually there's other things going on. And this is a piece by a friend of mine. We went to graduate school together, and she lost her husband at the age of 33 to a brain tumor. And she wrote this piece saying, I was a conspiracy theorist too, because when she lost her husband, she was desperate for answers. She needed a simple explanation of why her 33-year-old husband had died after a short illness. And she said, I was looking at all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories about where brain tumors came from before I realized what was happening to me. Is I wanted something simple. I was craving that sense of control. And I just think about her all that. She's a professor of psychology. She's brilliant. But in that 6 months, she said, I was susceptible to wanting that simple explanation. And so it's very tempting to mute our uncles in our WhatsApp chats and to resist having these difficult conversations. But we have to talk to one another about this, and we have to listen with empathy. It's not, hey, Uncle Pedro, you put that in the chat and you're wrong. And let me send you this fact check from Estado. This is why you're wrong. Uncle Pedro does not want to hear that. But what he might want to hear you say is, hey, I'm struggling with this too. I'd love to talk to you about this issue. I'm struggling. I don't know who to trust. I want to talk to you about this and hear your concerns. Those kind of conversations are hard. They don't happen overnight. They require empathy and they require really good listening skills. But there isn't an easy way to shift people who are already kind of really entrenched in their beliefs. So I'm going to leave it there, and I have time, I think, at the end for questions and answers. But I hope this has been somewhat useful.
So thank you so much, Claire. Now I pass the floor to Alexandre.
Oh, wow, already. That's going to be incredibly difficult to follow. Claire, it's really... I
agree with you.
It's so revitalizing to see someone who talks so passionately about media information literacy and getting people to think, So, yeah, incredible presentation. I'll just try to, make some justice and follow up on that. I'll try to share my screen as well. Hopefully you can see it.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, super. Okay.
Alexandre, você podia tentar abrir a sua... Exato.
Ah, perfect. Yeah. So, well, Claire talked a lot about the macro scenario of how disinformation, misinformation works, how people make money behind it, and some of the most interesting research about it. I'll try to bring up a more practical point of view. So I am a journalist. I graduated here from the University of São Paulo. And for the past few years, I've been working together with the UNESCO MIO Alliance as a coordinator of the youth subcommittee. So it's a bunch of young people who have media information literacy projects in their own countries, and they try to bring together a force to influence policy on a global level. And recently we did, because of the pandemic and everything, we got some funding to do capacity building workshops with youth organizations that work on all sorts of social issues. So it could be gender equality, it could be, discrimination, poverty, and so on, and trying to get them to incorporate media information literacy into their activities. And I'm going to try to address some of the main challenges that they spoke to me about. So the first of them was meaningful access to technology. So all the young people that we talked with, they were really eager to implement media information literacy exercises, get to classes, talk to professors, but sometimes they just didn't have access to technology. We do have in the West world, Europe and the US, they do have a technical infrastructure, but a lot of people here from Latin America, Africa, Pacific Asia, they just don't have that access to technology to really be able to implement such initiatives. So when we talk about access, we're not just talking about, oh, do you have access to the internet, but do you have meaningful access to the internet? Sometimes you might have access to the internet, but you can't find content in your language. If we talk about indigenous peoples, for example, sometimes you do get access to the internet, but in a few countries, such as in Brazil, for instance, and in Africa as well, the cost of data is too expensive. So maybe half the country can't afford to pay 10% of their income on data packages. So they only access WhatsApp and Facebook because that's the only thing they can afford. So being able to bridge that access to technology is one of the main problems we faced with youth organizations when we had this global training. Another one was really the lack of financial and educational resources. So there is a lot of free stuff out there if you know where to look for, but the beginning of that journey is quite intimidating, and especially to be able to establish a media information literacy project on the long term. So you might get some funding here and there for 1 year, 2 years maximum, or to do one specific project. But it's really difficult to pitch media information literacy and impart it in curricula, for instance. There are only a few handful countries around the world that have been implementing media literacy into schools. So how do we really make everything work when regarding to money? Journalists, they should get paid. People who work with media literacy, they should get paid as well. So, and the final challenge that I think it's one of the top three is how do we achieve a relationship of trust between the citizens and the media? And this was a very interesting part because, so we did a kind of a spin-off of the UNESCO MIO Alliance subcommittee. We published a research report at the Youth Vaccine Trust Survey because we identified that there's a lot of misinformation happening around the world, especially regarding to COVID. So we want to know what is it that influences youth into deciding whether to take the vaccine or not. So the survey was launched in November last year, and we ended in January this year. We just published in August. For the Brazilian friends that are out there, our partner here in Brazil was the Instituto Vero. So they published in Portuguese with the findings of per country specific results, but overall we got some 10,000 valid responses from 78 countries. And we tried to address which factors really contribute to the individual's decisions to take or not the COVID vaccine. And it was a good finding in a way, because general trends was that youth across all different age groups and countries, they were very confident in sanitary measures to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the main reasons was obviously to protect themselves, to protect those close to them, or because they were a frontline or healthcare worker. And something became very clear that they all said, it was through the roof, that the list of factors that influenced them into deciding to vaccinate or not was about transparency of vaccine data. So that was the #1 reason by far why youth decided to take the vaccine or not. But who do you trust when you're talking about taking the vaccine. And that was a bit of a more tricky question because we try to divide institutions into different levels. So government institutions, businesses, NGO, media, and we found out, according to corroborating to some other studies, such as the Edmund Trust Barometer that published in 2020 as well, none of these institutions, they're trusted equally across age groups. And it's the same case as youth. So if we look at the trends worldwide, so who do you trust? This is the question. Who do you trust to provide reliable information regarding the COVID vaccine? And this is the worldwide trend. So you can see the WHO and UNICEF and international health authorities, they scored very well on all countries that we surveyed. But when we talk about country-specific details, things get much more interesting. First of all, I was really curious to learn about media outlets because, at least for me, whenever I wanted to know something about the vaccine as a young person, young researcher or journalist, I went directly to the media outlets. But I had a relationship, or at least the idea, that here in Brazil, we distrust media quite a lot, right? So I tried to find out in the Brazil study exactly how much do we distrust our media, and I was completely appalled by the results. I'm sorry if you can't see very clearly because I know the numbers and the scale are tiny. But here in Brazil, we actually trust media outlets. Either we strongly agree with them being a reliable source of information, or we agree. And more than 50% of the population surveyed, when compared to only 25% of the population worldwide. So it's like, wow, that's crazy, you know? And on the other aspect, one of the least trusted health authorities that we trusted when it comes to reliable information regarding COVID was the national government. And I don't think there is any big question as to why, since the president himself was spreading misinformation around COVID. So I think that was a bit of what we picked up on the research. I was really interested about the fact that we actually trusted media outlets quite a lot here. But then if we come to the analysis in India, for instance, how much young people, especially, they trust media outlets, that number plummets to almost 10-15% that either strongly agree that media outlets are a reliable information source when it comes to the information regarding vaccine. And look at this, the national government health authority completely goes through the roof. More than 50% believe that the Modi regime was spilling only truths about the COVID vaccine, even amongst India's chaos and the huge second wave that hit the country. They were still fairly confident about the national government there. But here comes some tricky things, isn't it? Because then you start to realize that, you see that pharmaceutical companies, they're trusted more in India than NGOs and media outlets. And then you start to think about everything that Claire said. It's like, well, isn't that weird? I mean, they're the ones who are benefiting money-wise from making vaccines, and people still trust them even more. And finally, when we have a look at the UK, for instance, I'm bringing these examples because are the countries that we got more responses from. I think we got more than 500 from each of them. If we look at the proportion of influence that friends and family as well reported that they had when we're talking about COVID influence, media outlets, they completely end almost to zero. And the people in the UK completely have faith in the WHO and UNICEF. So it's a really interesting problem, because when we talk about trust and when we talk about transparency, it doesn't mean the same thing across the world. Depending where you live in, the people and the organizations and the institutions that you're going to rely on to trust about reliable information are different. So it's a wake-up call really for these institutions to invest and really make efforts to be more transparent. When we talk about how they get their information, how they publish, how they address the very simple questions such as what is mRNA. These numbers vary greatly country to country. And I do know this is not extensive research. We get 10,000 respondents, not so much. People self-reported their trust numbers, but it is a big warning, I would say, into how we see trust in institutions and media all across the world. So, but Adila Mar asked me, Alex, let's really be, positive. Let's talk about the practical impacts. And do you have a really on the ground media and information literacy project you can talk about so we can see how maybe we can, build more trust with young people, especially? So it's like, yeah, absolutely, Dilla. I have this incredible project, which is from the Digital Empowerment Foundation. They are an NGO based in India. I was there on 2 occasions in 2019, 2020. I was acting as a reporter and a filmmaker, documenting, making a series of videos of their media and information literacy projects on the ground. And I thought it was super interesting to bring the project here for us to discuss, because the Digital Empowerment Foundation, they have this massive amount of people coming online. If we talk about the next 1 billion that are becoming connected in the next decade, that's a huge number. And yet they're working with the poorest of the poor out there, people who don't even have access to electricity most of the day in villages and so on. How can you work with media information and really teach these people critical thinking so that you can have a lasting impact on misinformation? So that was a question that I had as well. How can we overcome these challenges? So I'm going to bring this kind of a case study or some possible solutions that people might think. I'm not saying this is the only way, by no means of the imagination, but I do think there are a lot that we can learn a little bit from their practice. And in one way, it's not that they have all these problems to access to technologies and bringing this last mile connectivity to people, but they really try to incorporate media information literacy in a holistic way. So they try to build sustainable interventions by creating projects together with the villagers. So it's not a one-time, you go there, you do a workshop on misinformation, media literacy, and then you're done and you go back. No, they really develop these projects throughout the years, and they follow the villages and the communities to make sure that everything goes well. So this is some of the figures from their annual report of 2019. I couldn't get anything more recent because, well, the COVID outbreak just make it a bit crazy. So, but they have been enhancing their initiatives even more. And just by a first glance, you can have a look that it's a pretty big situation there. I remember the first time I met the founder of the Digital Empowerment Foundation, I was like, wow, that's crazy. You have more than 600 digital resource centers across the country. So that's real, little, how can I say, buildings where people can go and learn about media information literacy. And you were able to impact over the years more than 20 million people with critical thinking skills. That's crazy. How exactly did you do it? Because when I went to visit him for the first time, 2019, I arrived to the Delhi office, and there were only 50 people working on this 2-floor apartment. And I was okay, but you have like so many people that you can reach. How do you exactly do it? And he was telling me a bit about the pillars of the work of Digital Empowerment Foundation, and they have a number of projects, but it really comes down to facilitating the access of building smart digital villages. So we don't want people to have to come to the cities. We have enough problems as it is. We want the villages themselves to become smart, to become self-competent in addressing rumors and misinformations. So SmartPur really is a system that's based on the hub and spoke model. So it's pretty much this. So to fix the problem of access to infrastructure, what they did was they're using a really simple network of, they go to a village, they find a place where they can build one Wi-Fi tower. And so they build this center, which is called the hub center in the SmartPur village. And then they create small hubs, kind of routers of Wi-Fi, 5, 6, 7 kilometers away, so that they can, propagate that Wi-Fi signal. So they're able to bring last mile connectivity to really, really poor areas of the country, in the rural countryside, that they have not access even to electricity. So that really just brings down the investment so much. All they have to do, set up some solar panels, set up one big tower, and you can leverage the unlicensed spectrum of Wi-Fi waves and capacitate, one trusted person on the village to become a network engineer, and they will be able to keep that running. So it's a really low cost access infrastructure that they have set up over there, and really makes it easy for people who are having trouble to, reach indigenous communities or people in rural areas of the country. This is really, really interesting. But more than that, they're not a profit organization, they're an NGO, but they work in a way that it facilitates media information literacy in an entrepreneurship way. So what is it? You bring up this information resource center in a village or a community, and then the information you choose one person that you really find, okay, they're a community leader, there's something that I can trust to develop the activities here on the center, and they become an information entrepreneur. And I find that word so catchy, because it's like, oh wow, information entrepreneur. So they actually get to make money to bring reliable information to people. And they do that in all sorts of ways. They do that via health, via telemedicine services, via providing digital courses and education, via providing, financial schemes like banking services, entertainment, movie nights, to villagers who the other option to them would be to, leave their job and their livelihood for an entire day, have to walk or pay for transport for 10 kilometers to a bigger city. So instead, the villagers have access to everything they need in this digital resource center. And it's a really nice way of looking at it, because then not only the entrepreneurs, they're able to capacitate people with media information literacy through workshops, but they actually become a trusted person in the village. So by mobilizing these people, this leadership, these voices that they already have a role to play in the communities, these digital villages, they surpass the barriers of class, caste, religion, and language, because then you're already talking to someone who knows the village, who knows the struggles, who knows, either they're Muslim or Hindu or whatever it is. They know how to reach out to population, and people already go for them because they're looking for very beneficial services that might have nothing to do with media information literacy. Maybe they just want to get a financial service in the digital center. Maybe they just want to get a doctor's appointment via telemedicine. But at the end of the day, those entrepreneurs, they become so trusted among the community themselves, because that's the place to go to when you have any questions, that they embed media information literacy abilities into these everyday capabilities. So if they go there, oh, I got a message on WhatsApp, I'm not really sure if this COVID thing is all right, they will go to the telemedicine center and they're going to ask this reliable person who is trained in media information literacy. So promise you, Dilla, I'll try to be short. So tangible impact, they have managed to do so with more than 800.
Alexandra, I am asking you for WhatsApp. It's your ending time. Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah. No, I'm on the last one. Don't worry. So with that, they have been able to set up more than 800 self-sustained resource centers across 90 districts in India. And especially now with COVID, they have been able, at least on these very small villages, we know it's not a fix-all solution, but they have been able to reduce vaccine hesitancy. They have been able to create community influencers that are properly able to train others and to how to fight misinformation and verify things that you receive on WhatsApp. And also the number of, mob lynching, violence, hate speech has been going down regarding to all those problems that we know very well that happened there. So yeah, that's it pretty much on a nutshell, guys. I'm sorry if I took too much time, but this is it. Feel free to ask questions later on. Hopefully this was, I don't know, popping some ideas in your head.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandre. Now, after these two presentations full of challenges and hope, which inspired us a lot of ideas and gave us a lot of think about, we will give the floor to our guests to ask their questions. And we will start with Januária. Please, Januária.
Hello, thank you, Claire and Alexandre, for the new ideas and so much inspiration and hope, because really, it's hard to be in this world of misinformation. So I would like to know, Claire, how to deal with the difficulty that our teachers has to teach about disinformation and misinformations, because even the teachers does not know how to do about it. And I interviewed the professor David Buckingham, and he said to me, oh, I think it's the biggest challenge of the media and information literacy, it's to form the teachers. So I would like to know what you think about this theme.
So on one hand, yes, it does feel overwhelming, but I also think that, yes, this is the biggest challenge of our lives. I do think society, almost the future of the planet depends on it. You know, will liberal democracies exist? What will happen in terms of climate? And I don't think there's anybody has all of the answers, because it changes all the time. So the landscape in 2021 looks very different in 2016. So I think for teachers, it's finding people who understand that this is always changing, and the fact that it's dynamic is exciting. And I also feel like it's, how do we connect the generations? So I spend a lot of time with students who are on TikTok, and in many ways, they're much more savvy about manipulation, because everything they put up has got a filter on. Like, it makes sense, but they have always known that. So they're almost hyper cynical. And then I have my mum, who has only ever known a world of gatekeepers, and she can't imagine that anything would be fair. And it's like, how can we connect these generations, knowing that we all have to navigate this information environment that's going to change every 6 months? The tactics change, the platforms change, the topics change, and that there isn't a kind of one and done, oh, you've gone through the training, you're okay. But that, you know, I get up every day, my alarm goes off, and every day feels new and exciting because everything changes. So I think for teachers, it's finding people who are excited and not scared by the fact that everything's changing. But how do we build this kind of network across generations? And I think in the case study, the kind of information ambassador model, that for me is like, is somebody a teacher, or are they a facilitator of a community where everybody can bring something to the table and nobody's the expert? We're all trying to figure this out. And that, it feels scarier, but I think that's the answer for a lot of what we're facing.
Thank you, Claire.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Here in Brazil, we have one of the biggest educator of maybe the world, Paulo Freire. And he always said, it needs to bring the word to the classroom. So that's why I agree with you. It's a big challenge, but we have to invite to our young people to discuss together and to learn together. So that's why there is no recipe, only questions all the time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Januária. Thank you, Claire. So I think that I will listen now, Elisa Tobias.
Okay, thank you. I will follow Januária and asking something. I think Alexandre bring an excellent example, but I will ask again, how can we work? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. How schools with low resources can work with media education? When I say low resource, I mean, in Brazil, we have difficulty with connection, with disponibility of computers for each student. So I'd like to know how to work with this problem.
Did you listen, Claire? Did you understand?
Yeah, sorry, I thought it was for Alexandra. No,
The question is for Claire, or a questão é para Claire ou para o Alexandre, Elisa?
Both.
You both
Yeah.
can answer. So Alexandre, we can start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the big challenges, isn't it, Eliza? When we think about Brazil, a lot of schools, they don't have even connection to the internet, or very poor. So I think it all comes down to, when we think about media information literacy, one of the things that Claire said is the difference between debunking and pre-bunking. So if you look at debunking, you're always following, what's misinformation, what's new. You're kind of like on a rat race, because, the conspiracy theories are going to keep coming. But if you instead look at it in a way of teaching people the ability to, types of misinformation, they usually appeal to your emotions. They can appeal to, they have these types of, they don't have sources very clear. There's a pattern that all the pre-bunking and the inoculation theory follows that we can use, so that we can train teachers, and then whatever comes their way, they'll be able to handle with it. Maybe they won't know for sure if this thing is fake or not, but they have the principal guidelines when it comes to really talking about media literacy with the students. And in that sense, I think it doesn't have to be online. It can be a wall on the school. It can be, a community newspaper. It can be old school, as long as you talk about, how media messages are really constructed and how citizens can intervene.
Yeah, I'll just answer very quickly I do think it's a problem when we focus exclusively on the platforms as if it only exists online. It is a real problem in terms of people's conversations with their friends and family and other types of offline modes. So I actually think media information literacy has to recognize that. And I do think public health has made people recognize that, because public health has always been in communities. Whereas I think journalism, when there was a lot of fears around elections, it was all about trolls in Russia, and it was all about memes on Facebook. And actually, I think that did us a disservice, because we should have been thinking about information in the totality, from the thing that your mum says around the dinner table to the thing that you see on TikTok, and that we shouldn't necessarily separate them entirely.
So thank you. And now we will listen Emilio. Emilio, you want to say your question in Portuguese, and after I can read in English?
Português.
Você pode falar então, depois
Tá
eu
bom.
leio.
Claire, em recente palestra você falou na Justiça Eleitoral do Brasil que todos os esforços atuais são para mitigar os efeitos da desinformação no ambiente digital, que esse fenômeno vai permanecer na sociedade. E aí eu pergunto, de que forma os influenciadores digitais podem colaborar com essa mitigação, uma vez que os esforços das plataformas não estão surtindo efeito, trazendo principalmente para o contexto brasileiro, onde a gente tem visto um aumento do discurso de ódio e principalmente da desinformação.
So, Claire, I will translate. In a recent lecture with representatives of the Electoral Justice of Brazil, you mentioned that all current efforts are to mitigate the effects of misinformation in the digital environment, that this phenomenon must remain in society. How can digital influencers collaborate with this mitigation? How can digital influencers collaborate with this mitigation, since the efforts of the platforms are not working, especially in Brazilian context, where we have seen an increase in hate speech and in misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a sexy answer, but we need a whole of society approach. And so in terms of digital influencers, as I think I said in the talk, we need more research about the disproportionate influence they have as influencers. So it was interesting in the case study that actually in some countries, influencers are quite low. So what's the difference between a politician or a TikTok influencer versus a football star? We don't really know those differences. And so I would argue that we need more research about what works and what doesn't. And I think the platforms have to understand that, because here's the problem. When Facebook started, somebody said, oh, we need advertising. And they built the same systems for advertising toothpaste as they did for advertising political candidates, with no understanding that there was a completely different situation. And so I think similarly with, the Facebook oversight board trying to make a decision about whether Donald Trump or Bolsonaro should be treated differently. I think what we need is smart historians, philosophers, ethicists, weighing in on these decisions, because everybody is not created equal, because their online presence is connected to the ways that our brains say that person's a politician, that person's a football star. So it's, again, not an easy answer, but I think we know so little about this whole environment. How many panels have we all been on in the last 5 years about this? But we actually know very little from a research perspective about how much misinformation is out there and how much harm is it doing. We just don't know. And so the example of the needles, is it that people aren't getting vaccinated because they think that Bill Gates is inserting microchips into them? Or is it because they're scared of needles and they don't want to say that? So it's very, very difficult for us to understand these dynamics. I think it's a real problem, but it's very difficult for me to give you numbers on that. And that's a real problem. And so making decisions about whether or not Donald Trump should be on the platform or not, it's very difficult to know without those numbers.
Okay, thank you. Emilio, quer complementar?
Não.
Okay.
Obrigado.
So we will listen now Maria Clara Cabral. Maria?
Hello everyone. Can you listen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first, thank you all, guys. I'm very honored to be here. It's a pleasure. And Ben, I will ask my question in Portuguese. Is that okay? I'd be more comfortable. Can you translate for me?
Okay, Alexandre, you can help me?
Ok. Eu queria saber da Claire se ela ainda acredita que iniciativas de jornalismo tradicional, velho e bom jornalismo focado em crianças, é uma boa opção para a educação midiática, para ajudar as professoras em sala de aula, se ela conhece iniciativas como essa ao redor do mundo, porque aqui no Brasil as iniciativas que focam nas crianças com jornalismo de qualidade são cada vez mais escassas, ao mesmo tempo que os jovens são cada vez mais atingidos pelas redes sociais, pelas fake news, eles estão na internet, eles estão conectados, mas não tem como se informar propriamente, porque não tem veículos focados neles. Eu queria saber como é esse cenário no mundo e se ela acha que é um bom caminho e qual a idade que a criança deve ser atingida com a educação midiática, se tem uma idade certa, assim, inicial.
Can you help me, Alexandre?
Yeah, that was a long question. I'll just try to remember everything.
Yes.
So it's about journalism for children, Claire.
Yes.
Maria would like to know, what do you think about the old school, initiatives that try to teach journalism to children, or that creates newspapers focusing specifically on children and young adults? She wants to know if you can give us some examples of what's going on around the world. Is that still a thing? Because here in Brazil, we don't see much of that happening anymore. And how old they should be, how old should we start teaching kids media literacy?
Thank you, Alexandre.
I would like to add, one time here in Brazil, I asked Claire about this. And
really?
I asked her how we can do about the young people. And he said, in that moment, she said to me, I'm not very worried about young people. I am most worried about the people are aging. And so what do you think now, Claire?
It's a great question. I'll say I agree. I remember newspapers making newspapers for children, and I have not seen it for a long time. I think it's critical as part of what I was trying to describe around participatory structures. Getting children to be part of something is the key. This shouldn't be us teaching them. It should be them teaching other people. And I would argue learning how to be a good journalist is part of that. Learning what fact checking is, checking, having two sources, having an editor, having a corrections policy, that teaching that to young people is critical as we watch trust in newsrooms go down. It absolutely has to happen. But I'd also argue, what does it mean to teach young people to be ethical, professional content creators? So many, as we know, young people dream of being a YouTube influencer or a TikTok influencer. They see it as a way to make money. They see it as a future career. So I think we should also be teaching them about how can they as an influencer make sure that they don't pass on misinformation? How can they make sure that they check their sources? So I actually think we should be teaching young people not just how to be journalists, but how to be other forms of trusted messengers in 2021. And in terms of when do we start? 3. I mean, when you see children with iPads, they can create videos on their parents' phones at the age of 3. So for me, they become content creators then. And so I think there are ways for us to adapt the curriculum all the way through, because when people say, oh, there's always been misinformation, why is it a problem now? And I say, because an 8-year-old with iMovie can create some of the most sophisticated, manipulated media I've seen. And they're 8 because iMovie makes it very easy. So yeah, I would say we start as young as possible. But like I said, how do we get the 8-year-old paired up with the grandpa? That to me is what's missing here, which is how do we recognize people who've only ever known trusted information? What can they teach the 8-year-old and vice versa? So to me, I'd love to see that generational shift, as opposed to here's the kindergarten curriculum, the middle school curriculum, the high school curriculum, the adult education learning curriculum, because it's all, everybody's seeing the same thing. And I think that for me that's what we're missing. And it's hard, and that's, to Alexandra's point, kind of village by village or community by community. How do we find those connections? Because also in a polarized world, finding places that people connect, because it's not political, well, around pets, around sport, around faith, around family. I mean, those spaces that even if somebody hates your politics, they probably love football or they love Labrador dogs. We have to find those spaces so that people can connect without fear and talk about the issues that matter without it becoming about the president or about the vaccine or about climate.
Thank you very much.
So Claire, I have a question here from a student in journalism undergraduate course at FAP, and she sent the question for my WhatsApp, and I will read this question to you. If I understood you correctly, what you are saying, the name, it's my student, is Juliana Tradiverissimo. Juliana, thank you for watching. So if I understood you correctly, what you are saying is that we cannot expect to educate every single person on how to distinguish real from fake, but rather anticipate their questions and answer them faster than the fake news, or at least simultaneously. What then is your idea of how journalists could do so? Would you, for instance, borrow from what consumer goods companies do and create panels to monitor what the pressing or even latent questions of the day are? Did you understand?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So for example, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, they have a team that monitors the social web. They call it social listening, and they're listening for rumors, but they're also listening for questions. So I think that's what's critical, which is rather than us just waiting for the rumors, how can we understand what people are frightened about? So, in the US, they've just agreed vaccines for 5 to 11-year-olds. Well, there's a whole host of questions today around that. So before, and that's something that the CDC and journalists in the US should have been preparing for the last month. They knew that this was an opportunity, so they should have prepared fact sheets, memes, videos. They should have, they should have been ready for this. And I go back to that information supply chain, is that we tend to be very reactive to events. And that's what journalists do. Something happens and then journalists report on it. It feels uncomfortable to be prepared for something. And certainly, as you know, communication departments are often very under-resourced. So nobody really wants to spend money on communications until it's a disaster. So I would say it's not as if it's not important to teach people the difference between truth and falsity. It is important to teach verification skills. I'm not saying any of that isn't important, but what I'm also saying is, how do we think about the information ecosystem in the totality and really understand that many times people are just confused. But when they're confused, they go to Google, and Google can often send people down certain rabbit holes, and somebody can become, a conspiracy theorist, and they didn't start from that position. But the quality information sources, the health authorities, the journalists, we hadn't filled those gaps. So here's an easy example to remember. So cancer cures, for a while, people were trying to sell apricot kernels and on Google. And if you search for cancer cures apricot kernels, it came up with lots of places to sell it. Now, no newsroom was going to debunk the apricot kernel story. It seemed crazy. So they were there making a fortune off apricot kernels because there was nobody debunking it. So if we don't know what people are searching for, we can't fill those gaps. And that's what I think we have to be much, much more aware of, is people are going to YouTube and Google for answers, but whose answers are they seeing first? It's often not traditional media who are just like, oh, we don't have to worry about Google. I mean, newsrooms have got better about search engine optimization, but for a while they weren't, or newsrooms are behind a paywall. So you don't get that, but you get the conspiracy theorist content on Google. So it's not an either or, we have to do more.
So thank you, Claire. We have time to one more question, and Victor Blotta wants to do.
Hi, my question?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Well, I want to really thank Claire, Alexandre, and our colleagues here. My question would be for Alexandre and Claire as well, about the role of the university. We talked a lot here about participatory culture, sense of belonging, listening with empathy. And I don't know if this is present in our university model. What changes do we need in our university model in order to help this shift in the conversation, in the holistic approach to media literacy? That's my question.
I think we can start, Alexandre. No.
Oh, super. I was going to say ladies first, but so, oh, look who's there with Victor. So Victor, that's a great question. And I think a lot of times, especially if we talk about, targeting kids, such as your son or, young people, people always seem to be like, oh no, but like we also need to target older people as well, because they're the problems. But I think, yeah, we do need to do that. But maybe targeting people who are already in universities is an easier path to get to them, because as Claire said, maybe older people, what are the real places in society you socialize with other people? It's a bit more difficult or tricky maybe to go, to the Labrador pub associate meeting or something like that, although it would be really fun. But it's really interesting to see that if you start bringing up the media literacy discussion with the students in universities, if you have that participatory culture where you try to engage with their families or, their friends, you actually get a much bigger impact than just the people that are on the university. And I think that happens every time you try to involve communities, be there, urban communities or villages, into whatever you're doing. I think it's really important to do, outreach programs and really try to listen to the needs of people and what are the biggest questions, what are the biggest concerns, so that, all the people that are already teaching in the university, whether the students or fellow professors, when they go back to those places, they can bring those discussions as well.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, I'll just agree. I think universities are massively untapped resources to be some of these information ambassadors. So the other day I gave a talk to a community college in Michigan, and the students were saying they do what's called service learning, where they have to go into high schools to teach them. And they're like, we often talk about body image, but actually we should be talking about misinformation. So I actually think that there is a way to take students that are going through media and information literacy curriculum and say, all right, you've learned it, can you go and teach it? So there's a great initiative in California amongst students who are Hispanic, who have to go through 40 hours of training, and then they go into the community as public health advocates, talking to their communities about getting vaccinated. And I read about that in the Sacramento Bee this week, and I was like, oh, that's what we should be doing for information. It's exactly the same thing. You give people 30 to 40 hours. This isn't just a nice extra credit thing. You really get trained up, and then you go out there and you really, you really help people. So yeah, I'd love to see much more of that across, and universities across the world are fascinated by this. Students know that this is something that might really impact their future. So I think we should be doing a lot more to tap into that potential.
So thank you. Você está sem som, Vitor?
I'd just like to say thanks. Thank you very much.
So we are nearing the end of our event, but we have time to one more question. If someone here wants to do one more question, Alexandre, Emilio, Maria Clara, Januária.
I have one more question.
So
I'd like to know how misinformation and freedom of expression should be increasingly present in cases of racism on the internet.
Thank you, Elisa.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said about things changing, in 2016, a lot of what we saw was outright false. It was just wrong. And in the last 5 years, the platforms have become much more aggressive against outright falsehoods, particularly around elections, around vaccines, around health. But what that means is the disinformation agents are now moving into this gray area and doing things like just asking questions. And when they just ask questions, they're actually using keywords that they know that when people go and search for those keywords on Google, they are more likely to end up on conspiracy content. Or it's first-person experiences, which don't break the guidelines. And the thing is, that's why misinformation is so hard, because this is legal speech. If we start taking down this kind of speech, I'm deeply worried about it. But it is bad actors taking advantage of freedom of expression. So we're sort of stuck in this place where it's important that we have this freedom, but then that freedom of expression is being weaponized by people who are trying to take advantage. So that's why ultimately we're not going to solve this through regulation, because if we crack down, they will just find other ways to go. What we need to do is to work with the public to get them to understand that, because I am deeply, deeply concerned about certain countries in the world passing regulation that's going to have quite serious consequences for speech. And it's very serious. And I know that we're all worried about misinformation, but most of the stuff I see every day, it's not great, but it's in this gray area of speech. And it's not easy to make. If I gave us all 10 examples, we could be on this Zoom call for 10 hours and we wouldn't agree with what to do with these 10 examples. Most of this stuff is not clear cut. Saying Bill Gates is microchipping you, I think we can all agree, not helpful, take it down. But people who are sowing doubt through, I'm just asking questions, or here's a video of my mum having a side effect from the vaccine, that stuff is much, much harder to know what to do with, so.
Thank you, Claire. Someone else wants to do a commentary, Alexandre, because we are ending the.
Yeah, no, it has been a lovely discussion, and I'm actually thinking out here because it is a gray area, and sometimes if you just, first of all, we don't even know what we talk about when we talk about regulation, right? We already do have human rights, that racism is a crime. So you can't do that on real life. But instead, we haven't really built up, clear definitions of what the online space is. A lot of people, they're trying to give out fines and, curb free speech when we don't even know what we're talking about. Facebook just released the metaverse. What the bloody hell is a metaverse? So it is. I don't think we can solve all the problems through regulation. And sometimes, if you just outright ban, anti-vaxxers, for instance, they might just get away from the mainstream and curb more even into their Reddit bubbles or different websites. So I do think that this bottom-up approach of really engaging the citizens through media literacy is essential when we're trying to tackle misinformation. But yeah, it's been a lovely event, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you, Alexandre. Claire, we are ending. Do you want to say something before we finish?
Well, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I took a number of screenshots from your slides, Alexandra, so thank you for that. And I would just say, sometimes it can feel like we do a lot of talking in this space. There's a lot of conferences and panels on misinformation. But the truth is, we're all still trying to figure this out, and talking about it is fine as long as we go out and take action. And I have a feeling that the people on this call are the type of people that actually do things. So I actually think this conversation has been I've really enjoyed it. And there's just still a lot of work to do.
So I would like to thank Claire once again, also to my colleagues, Alexandre Amaral, Laura Matos, Vitor Blota, and all the researchers of JDL research group, and to our professor Eugênio Butti. I think also to our guests, Januária, Elisa, Emilio, and Maria Clara Cabral. And finally, I thank to everyone who joined us here on YouTube. Thank you all. See you. Bye-bye.